On this Friday night, getting behind booster shots. The new recommendation, Canadian adults get a third dose of the COVID-19 vaccine.
What we need to do now is just to up our game regarding our own immunity.
Also, a new weapon to fight the virus and the lack of clarity on some travel rules. Hiring spree, the major growth spurt in Canada's employment rate. Who's really fueling the fiery hot housing market? And the concerns about a price correction, plus getting their shot.
They do a really good job of looking strong and great, and then can be susceptible to really rapid decline.
The mission to protect animals from COVID.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Colleen Christie.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with new developments in Canada's fight against COVID-19. The National Advisory Committee on Immunization is now strongly recommending booster shots for Canadians over the age of 50. That message reinforces policies already in place in parts of the country. Canada's Chief Public Health Officer says there is a need for heightened vigilance.
Severe illness trends have leveled off, but are still elevated and could begin to rise again unless we keep infection rates down.
The federal government is heeding its own advice. It has signed deals to purchase more than 1 million potentially life-saving COVID-19 antiviral pills. Abigail Bimman has our top story tonight.
Access to effective, easy-to-use treatments is critical.
Announced by the new procurement minister, a new deal for new COVID drugs. Canada buying 1 million of Pfizer's antiviral pill and up to 500,000 of Merck's, with options for 500,000 more. That's pending Health Canada approval.
This is absolutely to complement vaccines, and it's just another tool in the toolbox, but an important one.
We have to see the actual raw data to be really certain about how effective they are. They obviously do something. The question is going to become, is the benefit justified for their cost, because they are rather expensive.
At the same news conference, the government also tried to clarify new travel rules, but won't say exactly when all travelers, except from the U.S., will have to take an arrival test at airports and then isolate.
We are ramping up our capacity quickly and testing more and more travelers every day.
Nor would the health minister say how quickly isolating Canadians could expect to get tests back. Canada's top doctor eventually conceding
It's quite complicated. I think we're going to have to put up some tools on the website so that travelers can actually figure this out.
The other COVID news out of Ottawa Friday, an update from the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, now strongly recommending a booster after 6 months for everyone over 50 and other at-risk groups, and considered for those over 18.
An emphasis on those where the risk will be greatest and the need is greatest, and then also creating opportunities for others.
Provinces have already been rolling out their own booster plans.
Next week, we will expand booster eligibility to people in their 50s.
The way to go is for many, many people, third dose. Consider this to be a 3-dose vaccine now.
Getting his first shot Friday, one of Ottawa's most famous 5 to 11-year-olds, the Prime Minister's youngest son.
Hadrian's very excited about that, sort of, because I promised him chocolate.
A negotiation many parents know well. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
Vaccines are the best defense against the virus and its variants. Growing evidence shows COVID-19 boosters can significantly strengthen the body's immune response. And as Eric Sorensen explains, a new study shows it doesn't really matter which shot you get, so long as you get them.
Immunity from vaccines diminishes over time, but if there was any doubt about the value of a booster, a new study not only finds they're effective, but they work well even when you mix brands. A UK study looked at those who received 2 doses of AstraZeneca or Pfizer-BioNTech. They received boosters for one of 7 vaccines, including the 4 approved in Canada. The effect was a boost of antibodies and T cells against alpha, beta, and delta variants, equivalent to over 90% protection against infection and serious infection.
You get a very good immune response that involves the antibodies and in the T cells, which seem to provide a more broad response against multiple variants. Any of the approved vaccines at the moment, and the Novavax, which might get approval soon, also provide a very significant boost.
The study also validates the decision made by Canadian health authorities that mixed different vaccines based on earlier trials. After third doses, up to a few million Canadians will have received vaccines from different manufacturers.
Canada used data like that to help inform its decision. it was done with an abundance of caution and done thoughtfully.
But will current vaccines and boosters help against the Omicron variant? The study offers some hope there too.
It also is highlighting that in our bodies, we don't just make one antibody. We actually make a number of different antibodies. We are potentially generating some antibodies that are future-proofed against Omicron. We'll have to see.
Meantime, major manufacturers are researching new vaccines to tackle highly mutated variants. BioNTech is confident it can work up a response to Omicron within months.
We have the ability to adapt the vaccine. It will take about 100 days to develop a new and distribute a new vaccine, or start to distribute a new vaccine.
Even if a new vaccine is distributed next spring, it leaves big questions hanging over the winter. Will there be an Omicron wave? And will our third doses defend against it? Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Delta is still the dominant COVID variant circulating in Canada and around the world, but experts in Europe warn that could change quickly if people don't take the necessary precautions now. Early new evidence out of South Africa suggests Omicron is more transmissible than Delta. And as Crystal Goomansingh explains, a holiday party in Norway is a perfect example of just how quickly it can spread.
Oslo is on alert and reimposing COVID-19 restrictions. Masks, working from home when possible, and public capacity limits are all back.
Siden tirsdag har vi fått et stort utbrudd av omikron-varianten.
Norway's prime minister announced the measures after news a Christmas party last week had been linked with a cluster of new infections in the capital. One person at the gathering of about 120 guests had recently been in South Africa and was infected with the Omicron variant. The guests were all reportedly vaccinated. About half have now tested positive for COVID, and it's feared they may have contracted Omicron. If confirmed, it would be the largest single outbreak of the variant in Europe.
As you know, when you see a surge of infections, it's 2 weeks later that you start seeing that surge in hospitalizations and deaths. So I think we need to wait.
Experts in South Africa say the variant appears to spread more than twice as quickly as Delta, and reinfections are occurring at 3 times the speed of other variants. But they need more time to fully understand how Omicron is different. Those currently falling ill in the country are mostly young, unvaccinated people and pregnant women.
At this stage, we can say that even in Gauteng, which accounts for 72 to 80% of the new daily infections, we have not yet reached threatening stages in terms of our hospital capacity.
The new variant is leading to new demand for vaccinations. Next week, experts from around the world will gather to set out research priorities to better understand Omicron. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
In Auckland, New Zealand, after more than 100 days, bars, restaurants and gyms are open, beginning a new phase in its pandemic response. New Zealand is using a traffic light system to show where outbreaks are happening. A green designation imposes few restrictions. Auckland has started at red. There won't be lockdowns, but people need to be fully vaccinated to access many services. About 87% of people 12 and up have had 2 shots. A surprisingly strong job report could have some major political and economic implications. Statistics Canada says overall employment in this country is now higher than pre-pandemic levels. The economy added 154,000 new jobs in November. The national unemployment rate dropped to 6%, down from 6.7% in October. And there was strong growth in full-time jobs for women aged 25 to 54. That sector hit an all-time high of 80.7%. Our chief political correspondent, David Aiken, joins us now. And David, some good news on the job front. What's behind the gains?
The job report was good news, Colleen, but why? What was it that sent thousands of Canadians into the job market in November? The answer? Pandemic fiscal supports that ended in October.
With the expiry of those fiscal supports, people, the job search intensity likely increased, and given that job vacancies were pretty elevated, they were able to find jobs pretty quickly. And that was probably what was reflected in the November jobs report.
Crystal Bunce found part-time work in November when her Canada Recovery benefits ended in October, but it was not work in her field as a travel and entertainment photographer. November for her was hard.
I think that the government needs to be listening to real people, not just employers. Like the people who are writing letters to the government are real people. We need help.
The Trudeau government has tabled a bill, Bill C2, which it says would help by extending financial support to workers in hard-hit sectors like tourism and hospitality, or to people in regions under lockdown.
Across our nation, we still see that there's a number of sectors, a number of workers that still need support, and certainly Bill C2 is exactly doing that.
Conservatives say C2 is not needed. The MP for an Ontario cottage country riding, for example, said the biggest challenge for tourism businesses in his region is finding workers, not finding customers.
Like we've got countless local stories in Parry Sound, Muskoka of small businesses, restaurants, hotels that are open. They're busy. They've got lots of business. They could be open 7 days a week, but they can't find the staff to do it.
The surprisingly strong job data is now likely to force the Bank of Canada to consider raising interest rates more rapidly than it had anticipated. We'll get our first hint of how the bank feels when it makes its regularly scheduled interest rate announcement next Wednesday. Colleen.
David Aiken in Ottawa. David, thank you. Turning now to BC, where the sun made an appearance for a second day in a row. As floodwaters recede, people in the hardest hit areas are getting a sense of what's been lost as they try to move ahead. In Abbotsford and nearby Sumas Prairie, the lives of tens of thousands of animals were lost in the flood. But as Mike Drolet reports, by helping one another, farmers were able to save most of their livestock.
There was a moment when the Fraser Valley's dairy industry feared all would be lost. Evacuating the 23,000 cows surrounded by rising floodwaters was an impossible feat. But using trucks, the Army, and anybody else willing to help, 6,000 cows were moved out.
I basically don't know a farmer who hasn't taken in some animals through this, so there's a smattering of cattle everywhere right now.
The rest were brought to high ground to wait out the storm, while only a fraction succumbed to the elements.
When I heard the 500 number, I felt relief, honestly, as a farmer. And as we're going through it, it sounds like perhaps it's even lower than that.
The waters may slowly be receding, but the crisis for more than 800 farms that are still under an evacuation order remains. Hardest hit appears to be the chicken industry.
We're just shifting from response to recovery. We're hoping that by early next week, we'll just be in full recovery mode.
Initial reports suggest 97% of the chickens in the evacuation zone survived, which Mark Seaman attributes to their quick response and more than a few helping hands. When moving out hundreds of thousands of chickens proved to be a logistical nightmare, farmers enlisted all the help they could get to keep their barns dry and the birds warm. Many fed their chickens by hand. Hundreds of thousands still died.
There were farmers down there, they lost everything and ran over to the neighbor's farm to help him save it. They've lost everything, their home, their livelihood, it's gone. They're starting from scratch.
What's been communicated to me by the farmers is that those numbers are, they don't want to think about the numbers. They don't want to hear those numbers. They're very focused on moving ahead.
But it won't be easy. With roads still washed out, the supply chain could take weeks or even months to recover.
14% of our provincial production comes from the Sumas Prairie. And some of that is already being picked up again, so that's heartening.
There's no question the floods were and continue to be a disaster, but it could have been far worse if the farming community hadn't rallied together. Mike Drolet, Global News, Abbotsford, BC.
The unrelenting eruption in Spain. Coming up, the mighty La Palma volcano flexes its muscle again. Have a look at this jaw-dropping display of Mother Nature's power. The river of lava spewing from Spain's La Palma volcano is so strong it's pushing a massive boulder downhill. New jets of red-hot lava are also blasting out of the volcano. The eruption has gone on for more than 2 months, and with new fissures opening up, there are no signs it's relenting. In a rare move, the parents of the Michigan teen accused of fatally shooting 4 students at his high school are facing 4 counts each of involuntary manslaughter. Prosecutors say James and Jennifer Crumbley purchased a gun and gave it to their 15-year-old son Ethan, ignoring the school's warnings about his potential for violence. State authorities say the parents are now missing. U.S. Marshals and the FBI are involved in the search. Ethan Crumbley has been charged as an adult with 24 crimes. The Taliban is banning the forced marriage of women in Afghanistan. Its chief issued the decree saying men and women should be treated equal. The move addresses one of the demands set out by the international community to recognize the Taliban as Afghanistan's government and to restore aid. Poverty is surging in the country since the Taliban takeover in August. Since then, thousands of girls have been banned from attending school and most women haven't been allowed to return to work. Canada's skyrocketing house prices ahead. Which buyers are fueling the surge? It's been a tough couple of years for the economy, but there is one sector in this country that remains hot: real estate. Home sales in Vancouver are up nearly 12% over last year. The benchmark home price hit $1.2 million. In Toronto, the average home price is now above $1.1 million, up almost 22% year over year. Those sky-high prices are being bolstered by domestic investors, Canadians carrying 2 or more mortgages. And Gaviola explains.
Gravity-defying home prices have become a feature of the COVID era, reflecting a rush of people getting into the market with low mortgage rates, many seeking larger living quarters, more green space, a change of scenery. But there's another big driver: Canadian investors, not buying a place to live, but a vehicle for profit.
Real estate continues to be something that attracts people.
Ramona King helps run a real estate search company. She says a lot of homeowners in BC's Lower Mainland have taken advantage of higher valuations in their primary residence to buy another home.
And they purchased a vacation property there that they also know they can rent out, so they can get an income.
Home purchases by domestic investors soared during the pandemic, outpacing first-time home buyers and repeat buyers, according to the Bank of Canada. Terranet data shows that purchases by people who own more than one property climbed too, representing more than 25% of all transactions in the first half of this year. Analysis by Equifax shows a bump in the number of households carrying 4 mortgages or more.
If you look at some of the other provinces like Alberta, BC, there's a little bit of growth, but not to the same degree that we see in Ontario and Quebec. And actually Manitoba has seen quite a lot as well.
In a recent report, the central bank says the sudden influx of investors likely drove up home prices and exposes the market to a higher chance of a correction.
Interest rates could be a concern next year, on some of that non-mortgage debt, but it really depends. I think consumers probably have more buffer than we kind of have ever seen before.
With interest rate hikes looming next year and a big question mark about how long the housing market can stay this hot, the prominence of investor capital is making it harder for first-time homebuyers to find a home. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Next, the plan to protect Canada's susceptible species from COVID-19. Canadian zoos are eagerly awaiting a package delivery, but it has nothing to do with the holidays. A U.S. pharmaceutical company is donating 900 doses of a COVID vaccine made for animals. It's a product not on the market yet, but as Mike Armstrong explains, it's been approved for experimental use by regulators on both sides of the border.
There is a challenge in caring for animals. It's not just that they don't tell you they're sick, they actually hide it. It's instinctual. In the wild, they can't look sick in case there are predators around.
They do a really good job of looking strong and great, and then can be susceptible to really rapid decline.
Well, the Toronto Zoo is one of 6 in Canada about to get a new tool to keep its animals from getting sick. A pharmaceutical company based in New Jersey has developed a vaccine specifically for animals. It started as a product for pets, cats and dogs, but that hasn't been necessary. There have, however, been cases in zoo animals. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency has approved it for emergency use, and the company says it should ship in the coming days.
I see, it's so good.
Now, south of the border, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has also approved its use, and vaccinations are already underway, including at one of the biggest in the country, the Smithsonian's National Zoo in Washington, D.C.
So far, 76 animals have received at least one dose.
The zoo's chief veterinarian is very happy his animals are now better protected. In September, they did have an outbreak. 9 lions and tigers were coughing and sneezing. Tests confirmed it was COVID-19.
We were hoping, in a few days they're going to be better because that's what they do, and that's not what they all did. 3 animals were severely sick. One we actually thought we talked about euthanasia at one point due to renal failure.
Now, there have been deaths at some zoos from the coronavirus. Last month, the Lincoln Zoo in Nebraska lost 3 rare snow leopards. According to the association that represents Canadian zoos, its members are eager to get the vaccine, but to this point, there have been no cases.
We're very fortunate in Canada thus far, knock on wood, but I know that they're all chomping at the bit.
The Washington Zoo hopes to complete its vaccination program by the end of January. For the most part, it hasn't been as hard as one might expect. A lot of the animals have been trained to accept needles in return for treats.
Some of them get frozen juice treats. It might, in the case of our giant pandas, they get honey water.
Now, the Washington Zoo's also going to be holding a vaccination session next week for humans, something that, compared to animals, has so far been a bigger challenge. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Washington.
And that is Global National for this Friday night. I'm Colleen Christie. Tonight's Your Canada is Central Park in the city of Spruce Grove, Alberta, all lit up for the holidays. We love seeing Your Canada. Please email your holiday-themed photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Robin Gill will be at the anchor desk tomorrow. Have a great night.